So I can't tell you how pleased I am to be here. My other choice was Washington, D.C. But I really am sorry I missed the first 2 days watching that B-roll in terms of what sort of presentations you had. Mary Aiken, Jen Easterly, Mickey. I mean, it sounds like you really have had a wonderful 2 days, so I apologize for what you're about to experience with me. Just kidding. Any Naval Academy graduates in the room? Pity, because this is for you. So I got out of the car last night. It's midnight, walking across that 10 feet between the car and the front door, literally at midnight, because I was in another meeting in New York City yesterday. And out of the bushes steps Mickey, and I was like, who does this, right? The CEO hangs around all day, just waiting to visit and greet the keynote speakers. I got the uniform this morning, which is this, and so I apologize I haven't put it on yet, but I wanted to put it on for you and tell you this story. The Naval Academy, which is an institution partly in and partly beside the Severn River. I'm an Air Force Academy graduate, for those of you who didn't know what the inside joke is. But the Naval Academy has a visiting professor position. I'm in that, and I kind of do various things on the campus. And they have this annual lecture where they bring somebody, hopefully provocative, in from the outside to give what they call the Forrestal Lecture. Forrestal is this legendary figure in the national security establishment from 70 years ago. They do this 3 times a year, and the job of that person is to keep the student body awake, possibly give them something to think about. And at the end of it, if they had succeeded in doing something interesting and everybody's still awake, they give you a Naval Academy jacket. And on the one side, there's the Naval Academy crest, and on the other side, there's the name of the person. And so I gave that talk. I'm an Air Force Academy graduate. I happen to live in Annapolis, but I'm an Air Force Academy graduate. So there was some amount of skepticism in the room about whether I would put the damn thing on. And so I did. I put this thing on, Naval Academy jacket. Let's presume that that's what this is. And I kind of stretched my arms through one hole, through the other, and everybody in the audience is now hooting and hollering. I probably destroyed the mic. At any rate, hooting and hollering, and I stepped up to the mic, and I remember what John F. Kennedy said when he got an honorary degree from Yale. If you don't remember that, I'll paraphrase it. I said, I now have every Annapolitan's dream. That's somebody who lives in Annapolis. Every Annapolitan's dream. I have a Naval Academy jacket and an Air Force Academy education. Well, the university president, what they call the superintendent of the Naval Academy, was like giving me the high sign. It's like, that's not why we paid you to come here. But actually, it works, because what I was attempting to say is I'm ever so proud of where I've come from, but I'm delighted to be here, which is why I'm so pleased to wear this. So I'm very pleased and proud of where I have come from. I suspect each and every one of you is in the same place. And the diversity in this room you can see, but you can also experience it when you talk to the various experiences that are in the room. But we should all be privileged and proud of where we are, right? And that we commit all of that time and attention to the collective work that lies before us. So that's what I'm going to talk about today in my talk. I think that if I remember what Jen Easterly would have said, what I heard she did say, is that she's bullishly positive about the future. Remember that old joke of the CEO walking through the cafeteria, meets a CISO, whatever that is. CISO, the CEO has no idea. And he kind of comes up to the CISO and he says, you're the cyber person. Can't even pronounce cyber. You're the cyber person. And he says to the CISO, he says, so how are we doing? How is this company doing in cyber? And you recall what the CISO said. The CISO, now kind of like glaring into the headlights, says, in a word, good. The CEO now emboldened kind of plunges in and goes, well, how are we doing in 2 words? Not good, right? Now, the importance of that story is that both of those futures lie before us. And the distinction between those 2 paths, a good or a not good future, is not faked, it's choice. So that's really what I want to talk about today. What are the choices that lie before us? This is the talk as I thought about it when I was first asked to come here, Security in the Age of Cyber. But there's a problem with this, and that's this. This is the thing I see on my phone every day when I log into my email system. There it is right there. For those of you who can't read it in the back, it says, government-backed attackers may be targeting your account. Now, I read that. The first thing I did was went to Fort Meade, and I said, shame on you. They said, no, it's not us. We're not after you. Right? Turns out it's probably 300,000 people who speak a foreign language and whose favorite color is red in China. And the problem with this is that I can't succeed against these guys alone. I can't. There's no way on God's earth that I can. Am I in a problem here?
No, you're not a problem at all, but when the kid is, no, it's much better.
I don't know what he did, but hopefully it worked. Right? So thank you. Thank you. Is that okay? Is that better? The problem is I can't succeed against these guys. I just can't. Which puts me to go to a place where I say, but what if I made them beat all of us to beat one of us? The crowd that's in this room, and maybe 10 times or a million times the crowd that's in this room. What if we crowdsource them the way they crowdsource us? That's the only way for us to prevail against this crowd. So I've changed this to say, maybe the focus should be, how do we get cyberspace to meet our needs? How do we get critical infrastructure to meet our needs? This is a collective aspiration. This is something that I think is something where we could say we're not trying to solve a similar problem or achieve a similar aspiration. We're all trying to do the same thing. And why, if you have one half of a saltwater crocodile and I've got the other half of that saltwater crocodile, why would we not collaborate in suppressing and kind of driving this thing to the ground? Here's the problem. Anybody in the room familiar with an OODA loop? So if you're from the Air Force, you know that what the OODA loop is one fighter pilot staring across another fighter pilot says, I will observe, orient, understand the context of that observation. I will observe, orient, decide, act faster than you can. I'm going to do that over and over and over again. My OODA loop is going to be profoundly more kind of efficient than your OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act over and over and over again. Turns out in cyberspace, nobody has an intact OODA loop. Right? Somebody might see something, they have no idea what its context is. There might be somebody else that would understand that context, but they haven't had the benefit of that information. There's a third person that might be in a position to make a decision, and a fourth entity that might be in the position to act. And because we all have fractured OODA loops, no one's in a position to even respond properly, let alone to perhaps display and exercise some initiative properly. And what's the answer to that? Well, some would say we need to suck all those abilities to observe, orient, decide, act. We need to suck all them up into one big master of all, mother of all stovepipes, and make somebody the champion who stands before us to defend all of us in that difficult place. That's ridiculous. That's never going to happen. And you're never going to get the private sector to cede their initiative, their authority, their capacity, their innovative capacity to the public sector, to the government. And you're never going to get somebody in the private sector who can wield inherently governmental authority in a way that they can master the panoply of kind of the military and the diplomatic cadre and the finance and the legal aspects of that. What this calls for is, how do we lower the boundaries between these disparate parties and make it such that they got to beat all of us to beat one of us, right? How do we actually do that? And later I'll talk about how the Ukrainians have actually shown us exactly how to do that. So the question I'm going to ask you, and this is if I only had one slide, the slide that I would start and lead with is, so what's the purpose of your power? We all know that when you meet somebody, you're actually asking that question in the back of your head. What is the purpose of this person's power? You know within about 10 seconds whether this person spends their days in Mordor or Valhalla, right? You just know that, right? You could just feel that. It kind of comes out because of the way this people acts, the way this person acts, the way this person makes choices, about the way this person negotiates or collaborates or doesn't. Right? And so the question for you is, what's the purpose of your power? Do you have a thesis for what it is you want to do with the power that you have? If it's, I want to actually cause my stovepipe to win, full stop, I don't care about anybody else's, well, that's an answer. If it is, no, I want to actually make a contribution to every network that I can find and hope and expect that that network's going to respond in kind to actually make a contribution back to me, that's a different answer. That's a very different answer. And that's the world that I come from, which is, how do I make a contribution to every network I can find with an expectation that those will then respond in kind and we can actually achieve a multiplicative, a highly leveraged effect. So in successful organizations, and this is an organization, right? So it's not one that's on a single org chart. And you probably don't have a paymaster that can tell you what tomorrow's payroll is going to look like. But it's an organization which is which is trying to achieve something of a common aspiration. And it's going to succeed if it can achieve these three things. One, if everybody in this place knows what the organization's single purpose is. Now that has to be sufficiently generalized that everybody can say, yeah, that makes sense to me. But it also needs to be sufficiently tangible and real that you'd say, but I can sign up to that. That's why I come, right? That's why I come to Charleston. That's why I want to go to that foreign country of Nashville next year. That's why I want to do all of those things. Two, every person knows that they make a contribution to it and they know what that contribution is. They know what the kind of the thing is that they can bring to that party. And three, everyone's an owner, not an employee. Everyone is empowered to actually say, I will do something, even if I'm not told, even if somebody doesn't hand me a piece of paper and say, this is your next task. It's a self-organizing organization that from the bottom up has a sense of ownership, but they're all actually coherent and focused on a common aspiration. If you can do that, then kind of I don't want to be on the other side of that table acting against you. This is a leadership issue. I think that's what HIP is doing. It's not managing all these activities. It's reframing what's believed to be possible and appropriate. That's the nature of this game. Because what we've been doing over the last 50 years in cyberspace hasn't been working if the goal is to make it meet our expectations. If the goal is at the end of the day to actually focus on what I want to do with cyberspace as opposed to obsessing about the actors or the threat actors in this space. So we need to reframe what's believed to be thought possible and appropriate and actually seize that good option as opposed to the not good option that lies before us. Now, I stand before you, a bit of a charlatan. This is my first computer. It literally is a picture of my first computer. This thing lies in a desk at home. My wife pulls it out every once in a while and says, this is a candidate for the Saturday yard sale. I said, we couldn't get enough money to justify the kind of wear and tear. I got a B in physics with this. I got an A in calculus and chemistry the following year with a TI 99, but I still love this thing. And it was the dominant computer from 1620 to 1972 when I received my personal copy. Now, I tell you that, and I gave a talk earlier at a place where I used this shtick, but I showed the thing, I put it down there on that podium, and I started to walk away from it. At some point later in the talk, I said, so here I am, 50 years away from that dominant computer of 1972, and here's generative AI, and here's quantum computing, and here's gene splicing at home. The speed of what's happening is really the thing that's most amazing here. So for those that would feel sorry for me because I came from this backward background, if that's your view, we should feel sorry for everybody because the speed of this thing is going to essentially be vertical. And that's really important. But let's talk about how we got from that to where we are. Remember in the early days of the internet, they were just devices, right? Everybody had a device. Maybe you had a TI 99 or one of those things that actually stored information on literally a cassette tape. But you had devices, which the modern form of those devices would look like this. That's the obvious part. They needed connected tissue. And as Al Gore said, the internet is just a bunch of pipes. But you have all these pipes that essentially connect all of those devices. Fairly straightforward. But the thing that's really kind of daunting for most people is that there's something in between those, a logic layer, doesn't actually exist, but there is, for practical purposes, a logic layer that actually tries to figure out how to reconcile where the devices are, where the data is, where the processors are that present things to you, and the other ends of those kind of a world away. And that logic layer has some degree of autonomy in and of itself, which is really off-putting, which is why communications that go, say, from Charleston, kind of South Carolina, where there's some naval assets, to the west coast of the United States that would describe the movement of naval assets from the west coast to North Korea, they don't go on a westerly heading from here to there. They might at this moment in an American day go across the Atlantic, across Europe, across Asia, to get to the West Coast more quickly than if it contended with these clogged pipes, because the logic layer says, I know how to make best use of the assets in this space. And people don't understand that and don't encrypt those communications, which might in the case that I'm referring to be in order to deploy a couple of submarines out to North Korea, be shocked, stunned, and amazed when they get there 5 days from now and the North Koreans been waiting for them for 5 days. Because the logic layer behaves in a way that's not straightforward based upon your kind of reality in the physical world. But that's not the end of the story. These two layers are also in play. You've got the persona layer, people, right? And I think that today there are more personas in the internet than there are people on the planet, so that's an issue. But there's also this geographic layer. And most of our experience about how to get things done in the world come from the rules or the experience we have with those two layers. And we cannot ignore that as we come up with solutions in this space. The sum of all those is this. This is the internet. It's a somewhat vertical thing, which is the people make use of the devices, they're vexed or helped by the logic layer. There's all the pipes, the wires, and geography rules in terms of jurisdictions, about how we can store information, access information, all of that stuff. The problem is that most solutions in this space only consider one, maybe two of these layers. Most solutions in this space are horizontal in this picture. Very few of the solutions that I'm aware of are vertical in this picture, where they take in consideration all of those dynamics. And this is a very confusing space, as you all well know. It's how we make our living, right? By actually making this kind of something that's simpler or usable, meets our expectations. Now, that's a fairly complicated model. Here's the simple version. Simple version is that the world that we live in is comprised of technology and people, doctrine. Doctrine's a fancy word for have we kind of allocated roles and expectations. Is there some degree of understanding about you do A, I'll do B, and the result will be something that's greater than the sum of the parts. This is, for my purposes, the simplest description of cyberspace that I come up with. Now, why do I go to all that time and trouble? If you come up with a solution that only addresses one of these facets, you might as well not have done anything at all. Right? You have to think about what's the people piece, what's the expectations piece, what's the role responsibility. If the theory that you bring to the play is only about one of these dimensions, then you're missing kind of two pieces, two vitally important pieces. But there's actually a fourth piece, which is this is all done in the eternal presence of adversaries. Now, as you well know, sometimes that adversary literally is nature. Thunderstorm takes down electrical grid. That's an issue. Maybe a data center goes with that. Sometimes it's complacency or incompetence. People do make mistakes, but increasingly that red thing in the background is an active human being, whether it's a criminal or a rogue nation state that's trying to do kind of harm, damage in this space. And therefore, our solutions have to address all four of those pieces. That's my bottom line in terms of if you have a theory of the case, if you're going to get up in the morning and say, I want to make the world a better place, I want to make this thing meet my expectations, you need to address all four pieces of that. Now, you all know this story, the strategic context. There are sins, things that go wrong in this space, and sinners. And far be it from me to tell you who these people are. And they're all there, right? So, but it's an offense persistent environment. What do I mean by that? You cannot take the crowd on the right completely off the table. You can change their decision calculus. There is a role for cyber deterrence. You can make yourself a harder target. You can impose consequences on them, but you're going to be eternally dealing with them because the cost of entry is still too low, and the lucrative assets they might acquire are still too high. So here's the state of cybersecurity in 2025. It's an offense persistent environment. That's the point that I just made. Devices and systems are largely indefensible. That's not to say that they can't be defended, but they don't defend themselves, that they're not inherently secure. You can't say, hey, look, I fixed that. Now I'm going to go off and do something else. I remember the COO of FedEx once called me. I was on the board. He says, so tell me again why we don't buy perfect software. I said, you dear sweet soul, come over here and I'll hug you, right? The reality is that the best you could do is to build, deploy defensible systems that are not perfect, right? Meaning that there's a human component that you must add to that, which is you must then understand how they're being employed and you must then stoutly defend them. Detection and response is currently the dominant strategy. That's a little bit crazy. That's an important piece of it. But if you wanted to defend your house and you were in a bad neighborhood, that's where we are, you wouldn't have canvas laps, you wouldn't have canvas pieces of fabric kind of as your front door, your side door. You wouldn't have an unlit yard. You wouldn't have kind of the absence of a fence. You would do all of those things to make it such that you had a defensible property. There's a role for that here. And then cyber is sometimes seen as a stovepipe unto itself. When I ask most CISOs, what do you do? What's the purpose of your power? I sometimes get the answer of, I defend digital infrastructure. It's a noble answer. It's a great answer as far as it goes. But it's not the answer the board's looking for. It's certainly not the answer your enterprise is looking for. What they want to hear is, I've read the business plan. And I know that we want to do things by, with, and through the use of digital infrastructure. So my job as a CISO is to ensure that we can achieve our aspirations by, with, and through the use of digital infrastructure. That's an answer that makes your heart sing, which means that cyber is not something that we care about for its own sake. It's something that we only care about because the things that are dependent on it are the things we care about when we wake up in the morning. In the absence of strategy, nothing strategic. What a pithy statement that might be. But that's my point, is that you have to actually have a strategy in mind, which is if you kind of answer the question, what's the purpose of your power? You're actually speaking through the lens of whatever that strategy is on your part. So I'm just going to go through the why, what, how, who. The why of cyber, remember Jeff Moss when he says, why do race cars have bigger brakes? So they go faster. It's not about the brakes, it's about the car. It's about the performance of the thing you already care about. There's an equivalent of that. I was almost going to say analog of that, pun intended. There's an analog for that in cyberspace. Why do we care about cyberspace? Not for its own sake. So the why of cyber is I want to do stuff. What is the stuff you want to do? That should be your focus. Don't go into a fetal crouch worrying about what the adversaries have done overnight. Get up in the morning and run to daylight and say, what do I want to do by, with, and through digital infrastructure? The what, I've described that already, and it's done internally in the presence of that red background. And the foundations of the strategy that emerge are relatively straightforward. Make it defendable. Actually defend it. That's a human enterprise. Leverage all the instruments of power in the collective defense. Technology is one of those, but so is coalition building and the human skilling and the kind of the allocation of roles and responsibilities, and align actions to consequences. That's my fancy way of saying it's about more than shooting our way out of this. It's about more than saying I'm going to fine and impose consequences on the guilty, the transgressors in this space. There should be rewards for good behavior. There should be positive things that ensue if somebody's done the right thing or at least attempted to do the right thing. There are 4 reconciliations required. I'm not going to go through all of these. Relatively straightforward. What I want to do is to build a model. And the model looks like this, right? The basic security framework that we use in so many other areas, right? Whether that's kind of building a secure facility that lives in a physically contested area, whether that's building and deploying a military, whether that's building and deploying defensible digital infrastructure, that's where I'm going to go, looks like this. Starts with planning and initiative. That's the foundation. That's that bottom layer down there. Kind of in the absence of strategy, nothing is strategic. Sitting on top of that, you then need to define your priorities. Like what's more important or less important to you. You cannot be all things to all parties. You can't defend all things in cyberspace. So you need to make choices. And if you don't know what your dependencies are in digital infrastructure, you'd be hard-pressed to make any choices. So this is where thinking comes in. Once you've done that, you can then say, I'm going to make investments in those things that are my most high priority issues or capabilities. And again, that's not just about the technology, which is reflected by the word material at the end, but it's also how do you make those investments in doctrine? How do you make those investments in people? Once you've done that, you can on top of that say, I'm now prepared to understand how the system that I've built, deployed, and proposed to defend, how it's actually being used. And I do therefore have vigilance and cognizance about how that thing is being used so that I can step in at the earliest possible moment with the highest possible leverage, engage whatever it is that's holding that at risk, and actually evict it, get it out of the system. Once you've done that, then you're prepared to actually participate in a fist fight. Now, sometimes it's the close-end fight. Maybe everyone can participate in that. If something's inside your infrastructure, you have every right to kill it. You don't need to ask what it is or whether you kind of have some permission to kill it. If it's inside your own territory, kill it. If it's at the edge of that, well, sometimes that's problematic. Hot pursuit is still illegal under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, but there's a close-in fight. But there's an away fight as well, which is to then reach outside of that, and this is where the inherently governmental authorities typically step in to impose consequences on those who transgress. And I've laid all this out in the way that I did because I do think that it's hierarchical. You can't do those top 2 things without the foundation that I've described on the bottom. You just can't. You cannot shoot your way out of this. What do the Marines say? When the enemy's in range, so are you. And if we just start shooting, we're going to find that kind of with no defensible platform behind us or no solid foundation underneath of us, it's just a race to the bottom, right? And we are being crowdsourced in this space. So that foundation is this anvil. The hammer needs an anvil. You need to have both pieces. And it is hierarchical. If you haven't done it in the way that I've described, at least in the way you've thought about it, then you're going to find that you're kind of one hand clapping. Now, these things are all applied, of course, concurrently. You don't say, well, I'm not going to do a damn thing until I do the first thing and then the second thing and the third thing. They're all applied concurrently. But in terms of the priority you're thinking, I've laid them out in the order that I think is appropriate. It's concurrent, it's hierarchical, it's mutually supporting. So it looks like this, kind of on a very simple kind of chart. For people my age, they like charts like this, but these are not actionable. And it feels like this. Here's my last slide. But in the world we live in, where it's complex, it's dynamic, you know that, you live in that world, where it's more fraught, it's more frail, more fragile than it ever was before. There are more rough edges, loose ends than ever in history. In that world, we can, in fact, prosper. We can actually thrive and prosper if we do the following, which is to have an understanding of the systems and connective tissues in play, understand why we care about them. You know, not the brakes, but the car. What is it I want the car to do? Commit to resilience alongside market efficiency and innovation. Mind you, for the last 50 years, market efficiency and innovation have been the drivers kind of in the development, deployment of cyberspace. Kind of resilience or inherent safety has never been kind of given equal priority. 3, we need to have a diverse, integrated, forward-leaning capability, meaning every head in the room. We just need make them beat all of us to beat one of us. And 4, unified operations bolstered by growing strategic resilience. What's really remarkable when companies or individuals get into a difficult place, so they move from peace and tranquility, where we almost never live, to an emergency where they have to work harder to survive the day, to a crisis, where you need to augment your resources. That's really the magic moment. If you move to crisis and you don't have the advantage of a pre-built, a predefined coalition where you can break glass and call a friend, whether it's to provide technology support, legal support, maybe diplomatic support. If you haven't pre-built that coalition at the moment you move from emergency to crisis, you're going to lose. You're going to lose because you haven't actually set the stage such that whatever it is that's afflicting you has to beat something more than you, right? And mind you, when they show up, they've already crowdsourced you implicitly, at least, kind of in a way that you can't crowdsource them. So I would say that finally, good luck to us in this regard, but it's not about luck. It's about what we actually do to actually kind of chart that course so that we go down the good path. And I'll leave you with this anecdote. We've all been watching with great interest what the Ukrainians have done kind of in their fight against the aggression of the Russians. And I feel that that's exactly the way that was set up. And there's a physical aspect to that. There's also a kind of a cyber aspect to that. And the Ukrainians have done three things that have been war-winning against all odds. And when I was at the White House as the U.S. National Cyber Director, I was asked, how do you think this is going to go? I got it dead wrong because I did a quantitative assessment based upon what I thought the numbers, the depth of the bench, the technology, the quality of the technology. So I got it wrong. But the Ukrainians have proved us all wrong. Why? Because they did three things. One, they made modest investments in their technical architecture. They made it such that what they then had going to war was not the perfect architecture, not a secure architecture, but it was a defensible architecture. And they then did the second thing, which was they then defended it with world-class expertise. Now, I would quickly observe that the Russians helped develop that world-class expertise by conducting training exercises almost every day from 2014 to 2022. We're going to take down your electrical grid today. Good luck with that, and so on and so forth. But the Ukrainians never missed a step, never failed to take advantage of the opportunity to understand their architecture better than anybody else would. When the Chinese, for example, say, hey, we're going to live off the land, what that really means is I'm going to know your architecture and your tools better than you will. And if you cede that advantage to them, then shame on you, shame on us. The Ukrainians took that away. They said, we know our architecture better than anybody else on the planet. But the third thing, and the war-winning thing, is the Ukrainians developed a coalition such that they said, you need to beat all of us to beat one of us. Amazon Web Services, he said, so on and so forth, all manner of kind of entities that were not co-combatants, they were co-defenders. And the Russians are vexed beyond all measure by this, saying, no, no, no. If you help defend these people, you are a co-combatant. That's nonsense. You're co-defender. There's no reason why we can't do that. There's no reason why we can't crowdsource the rat bastards in the space. That's a technical term. The way that we're being crowdsourced by them, right? And so that's the bottom line of my strategy. But when I play that back to my Ukrainian friends, they always remind me, they said, yeah, those are the three things we've done, but you have to remember the fourth thing, the most important thing, which is remembering what cyberspace is for. So let's get up in the morning and let's run to daylight, making use of it in ways that are positive and compelling, and I am positive and kind of robust about what I think the future holds, so that whatever it is that's going to afflict us needs to catch up to us first, right? That's the kind of initiative that I'd like to actually be a part of. So I think I have about 7 minutes left. I'm happy to take a question or two. I don't want to talk about last week's Air Force Navy game, so if you steer clear of that, everything else is fair game. Anybody have any questions? Or if you don't, I'll just make the question what I want it to be.
Exactly. You'll get a great answer no matter what you ask, yeah? So please. Chris, a quick question from me back here. What kept you awake when you were in your role to protect the country?
Us. In a word, us. Right, so remember that old kind of quote, the problem's not in the stars, it's in us. I think the complacency that I sensed amongst the people that said, I need to be defended, or I need to make digital infrastructure is not working for me. And then they would immediately say, and I hope to God somebody's doing something about it with their hands in their pockets. I think that's an issue, right? We need to say, so if you care about the robustness, the resilience of the critical functions that are dependent upon digital infrastructure, so I don't need you to care about digital infrastructure, but you care that you can bank online. Do you care that you can follow your grandchildren to social media online? Do you care that we can actually manage critical assets like fighter airplanes and nuclear weapons using digital infrastructure? If the answer is yes, then what are you prepared to do to actually see that through? What are you prepared to do to make a contribution to that? Because most of the people that are on the front lines of this are not the IT or the cyber experts. They're just kind of ordinary people, God-fearing ordinary people that are actually trying to make use of it, aren't they? So what contributions are they willing to make kind of in their skills and in their actions? What contributions are companies who are not engaged in IT or cyber work per se, what contributions are they willing to make sure that digital infrastructure will meet their expectations, that the critical functions will work? So complacency was like the center of my nightmares, which is, who is it among us that's willing to stand up and do something about this so that we can get this work done? If it's not every hand in the place, then we're already starting kind of a man down or a person down on a team that needs all hands. Is that the question you asked?
Yes, absolutely. Next
Yes,
one.
Chris, I've heard you talk about the concept of a coalition to battle this kind of asymmetry that we're in right now with cyber warfare. What would you suggest for all of us here in the room are the things that we can do to help establish that? Because the cynical side of me says that it's very difficult for...
We have every reason to be cynical. We do.
Yeah.
History would say you should be cynical. You should be very cynical. But there's no other path forward, right? It's like, what did Churchill say about the Americans? You can trust they're going to do the right thing after they've done everything else. We've done everything else. We've done everything else, right? We've avoided collaboration like the plague. And to be sure, I'm talking about collaboration. When we talk about coalition, I mean to say that this is a true collaboration. What is that? That's different than division of effort, which is an agreement to not collaborate. And so what does that require? First, collaboration requires that we're actually trying to do something that is a shared prospect, maybe address a shared threat, maybe achieve a shared aspiration. But we need to start with that. We get that for free in cyberspace. We're there, right? We all depend on the same digital infrastructure. Two, there needs to be a degree of professional intimacy between the parties in that space that are attempting to collaborate. Why? Because if you kind of at an arm's length say, we'll just do this by Zoom, I'll meet you on Zoom, we'll kind of sustain the relationship on Zoom, we'll trade kind of stories about our children on Zoom, you never achieve a degree of professional intimacy, which is not about affection, but it's about understanding. Kind of people are going to ask the wrong questions, you're going to provide the wrong information, and until such time as you're so close to them, you can see what they're actually trying to do. You never get to a place where you say, holy cow, you've been asking me the wrong questions. I've been giving you the wrong stuff. The reason that the Five Eyes relationship is so special, that's the term they use, so special in the intelligence community, that's the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. And mind you, there's a lot of other relationships that are equally special today, but the Five Eyes is the one that's legendary, is that they achieve a degree of professional intimacy. When I was in the UK from 2003, 2006, I ran our half of what used to be called Bletchley Park. We had 3,000 people in the United Kingdom at that point in time. Why? Not because we wanted to get 3,000 people a vacation, but because we wanted to develop a professional intimacy so that they would cheek by jowl be sitting alongside their British and their other Five Eyes counterparts to say, now I see what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it. And we can then develop this ability to pick up the phone one day and say, you would never have known to ask me about this, but here's an insight to something I know you care about. The other half of that I know lies within your stovepipe. I've gone long on professional intimacy, but it's so, so important. If you get those two parts right, then there are other two parts that fall out of that is you need infrastructure that makes it possible for you to get together and have those dialogues. And you need leadership that would sustain that through times of peace and tranquility. When the mind wanders and you say, I just want to pull up the ropes and be comfortable again. I don't like hanging out with extroverts. I want to hang out with introverts, right? So I just want to be by myself, right? You just need to sustain that across time. And if we get that right, then I think that we'll have the ability to use every head in the room. So I've said that in the most general, perhaps strategic way, meaning that, well, what are we going to do? If we leave this church revival and we go out to the car, we have our hands at the 10 and 2 o'clock position on the cars as we drive off this lot. What are we actually going to do to make that happen? The spirit is high, but I have no idea what to do. Let's pick some real problems and solve them. Ransomware is a common affliction. So why don't we kind of say, hey, let's solve that together. Let's actually kind of roll up our sleeves, get into the room and say, how do we solve that? Because the transformation I'm arguing for, like any other transformation, is going to be built on the back of real work. And somebody in any collaboration needs to go first. When the Americans showed up at Bletchley Park in the fall of 1940, they were instructed by President Roosevelt, don't share anything with those people until they share first. They were told to play go fish. They ruthlessly ignored those instructions. They put stuff on the table that the Brits never would have known to ask about, never would have known the Americans had. And so the Americans went first, and it wasn't because they were noble, it was because the Germans made the mistake of shooting at them on their way to Bletchley Park. But the Americans went first. And then once that happens, anytime you kind of approach this two-door sequence and you open the door for somebody behind you, they're going to step up and they're going to open the second door. If you go first, somebody will follow. It's a long answer to a great question. Maybe 2 quick questions and I'll get off the stage.
No, for sure. People. Um, you had a slide earlier that had kind of a layered approach from foundation through execution. Is there anything there where you see we're particularly lagging or an area where you think there needs to be additional focus?
Yeah, so she asked about the slide that I showed. She said it was the most amazing sequence of slides she'd ever seen. Thank you so very much. But is there
It was brilliant.
anything particularly lacking? Yeah, it's the thing I didn't show, which is the overlay, which is that those things must be done concurrently and collaboratively. That's the thing. It's the interstitial part. It's the fabric within which that operates. That's the most important piece. And I think if we're lacking anything that shows up on that chart, it might be the bottom aspects of that chart, which is, board CEOs, they care about cyber because they think they should care about cyber. They have no idea why they care about cyber, right? And so it's up to CISOs and others to say, hey, look, I've read the business plan. We're dependent on digital infrastructure. That's news, right, in terms of most boards. And so if we can start with the thinking part on the bottom and drive that through the rest of those, I think we're in a better place. Last question.
Okay, I wrote some of this down because I get really nervous. So,
I am too.
I'm extremely nervous. I understand.
how many keynotes do you have to do before you don't get nervous anymore? So, you essentially, through collaboration, are trying to champion unity, and kind of shared thought. And I guess my question is, for unity and purpose in cybersecurity, how can leaders encourage authenticity and collaboration in a high stress, high stakes environment like that, to essentially, you talk about, coming together and building that professional intimacy. And you also incorporate the leadership of, hey, someone's got to step up. But okay, the leader has stepped up. How do you take that to the next step to encourage folks who, I kind of honestly struggle with my teams resting on their laurels and not being proactive, but then trying to think like that.
That is a great question. And so I'm going to give a 2-part answer, and I'm happy to do this kind of on the side afterwards. First, you've used the word leader as opposed to manager, and I think that's really important. Leaders distinguish from managers because leaders reframe what's believed to be possible and appropriate, often with the advice and counsel, the insights of the people that they're, supposed to serve. But it's different than management, which is just to allocate the tasks, synchronize them, and deploy that back as perhaps a somewhat synchronized, coordinated activity. So this is about leadership, reframing what's believed to be possible and appropriate. And my favorite quote about leaders is, if you're going to be a leader, lead at all times. If necessary, use words, meaning the actions you take are going to be far more important than the words you use. And so people be watching you. They're like, so how does this person spend his or her time? Right? And if what they do is they say, I'm going to commit the resources of this organization to achieve things that kind of are outside the specific remit of this organization. Why? Because we're trying to achieve this multiplicative effect, then everybody will act accordingly. Everybody will respond accordingly. And that first chart that I showed you about the nature of successful organizations, if the leader says, I am the smartest person in the room, that's seldom the case. It's never been the case for me that I've been the smartest person in the room. If the leader says, I'm the smartest person in this room and everybody else will simply do what I tell them to do, when you go away, they will simply wait for you to come back. Nothing happens in between, right? And so you just need to be a leader who actually empowers and delegates, but actually attaches people to that common purpose, that common aspiration. But do this at a meeting from time to time, say, hey, this organization that we are dealing with, I think that their strategic objectives include the following. And what have we done to help them with that? What have we done to actually deploy our assets so that they might succeed, so that they might achieve those? That's new and novel, as opposed to, hey, we need to double down and make the profit and loss kind of. Pepper on broad, which is truly late, right? Out of point to that thing that nobody else is talking about. Do so with your actions. Do so with the resources you bring to bear, and give everybody else the ability to participate in that, such that they feel really good. And at the end of the day, I've done something that's actually transcended, multiplicative, bigger than myself. I know I've overstayed my time. Thanks very much. Good luck to you.